1950s, the United Nations came up with a charter or an initiative for decolonization. They wanted every country still under colonization to be independent, non-self-governing territories. Non-self-governing territories, simply put, simply means colonialism. Now the word colonialism, if we look at the root word, is colony. Cambridge Dictionary defines a colony as a country or area controlled politically by a more powerful country that is often far away. Merriam-Webster's, which I like to call the watered down version of this particular definition, which is American by chance, defines it as a body of people living in a new territory but retaining ties with the parent state. Under that modern day watered down definition, the United Nations state that only 17 countries, 17 people or territories are still classed as non-self-governing territories. But if we take the original definition or the historic definition, which Cambridge Dictionary uses, we'd find that list would be greatly increased. Take a look at these 17 nations currently on the United Nations list. You'd find the United Kingdom dominates the majority of that list. But today's focus is not on the United Kingdom, and I'll tell you why. All of the territories that the United Kingdom currently govern, they gave the opportunity for an independent referendum. And believe it or not, all of those nations decided they would like to stay under British territory or British rule.
This administration, independence is not on our agenda list.
Although the vote was narrow, with 45% of the voters saying yes and 55% saying no, I believe the result is positive news.
The Falkland Islands remaining a British overseas territory in the weekend referendum.
France, however, a country that only appears on that list twice, had to cede its territories. In 1958, when the then French president gave the country of Guinea an opportunity to have an independence, they didn't think the country would like to seek independence. So when the majority of the country decided they would like independence from France, the French president at the time was really angry, and the 3,000 French people who lived in Guinea at the time were told to leave the country and destroy it while leaving. They destroyed hospitals, schools, public buildings, railway, anything they deemed to be a benefit to the country from France's rule, they destroyed, plus more. Believe it or not, this destruction that France did in the country of Guinea sent out a clear and frightening message to all other African nations who were still under colonization from France. This sent a devastating message to them that if you seek independence, the same will happen to you. Now in 1963, France felt that, you know what, we have to make that message a little bit stronger. So in 1963, an assassination happened of the Togo president Sylvanus Olympius, because he decided that his country would like to be independent from France, and he was later on assassinated. Sylvanus Olympio decided that we will have an independence, but pay France a debt for what it deemed to be the benefits of colonization. Can you imagine? I'm going to pay you a debt for enslaving us, building railroads and building buildings, but we're going to pay you a debt because you built those things and enslaved us. We owe you money. So this Togo president decided he was going to go for independence, but still pay France a debt for the infrastructure or the things that they built, the things that were beneficial as a result of colonization. But paying a debt to France, problem solved, right? They can be independent and just pay a bit of money to France. No, because France calculated the benefits of colonization at the time to be around 700 million US dollars, an amount that was a staggering 40% of the entire nation's GDP. Obviously, this was an amount that was insurmountable. This was an amount that they had no chance of ever paying off. So the Togo president, Sylvanus Olympio, and this is how he died, decided that they were going to stop using the French franc and instead print their own money, because they could print as much of this as they like and pay the debt with their own currency. Now, 3 days after this man, Sylvanus Olympio, decided that the country would print its own money, its own currency, 3 days after it started printing was when he was assassinated outside of the United States Embassy. The question is, why does France only appear on the United Nations list of non-governing territories twice? Why do they not feature more often? Well, between the 1950s and 60s, France adhered to the UN's call of decolonization. But they did it in a very tricky and conniving and very deceitful way. It agreed that those countries can become independent, but that it would have control over their economies in doing so. This control over their country is known as the Continuation Pact, and is a pact to control the economies of 14 African nations over West and Central Africa. Now, this Continuation Pact, or French Colonial Pact as it's officially known, the alarming thing about this pact is France's requirement for all of these countries to use what is commonly known as the CFA franc, a currency that is controlled by France, located in the Central Bank of France in Paris. This currency was previously backed by France's own franc, and with the introduction of the euro, was later on backed by that. In simple terms, France has imposed on these nations the use of its own currency, even though it itself no longer uses that currency. They went on to use the euro in 2002, believing it was more reliable and secure, but still imposed the use of the CFA franc, their former currency, on these 14 nations in Africa. The question is, why have they imposed the use of this failed, useless currency on these 14 nations? One word: tyranny. A tyranny that restricts countries from forming their own policies on money. A tyranny that confines French Afrique from deciding how much currency to release into their respective nations. But that's not all. In the Colonial Pact, in that pact, France has said that those 14 nations must deposit 60% of their national reserves into the French Central Bank, and imposes strict terms on them accessing that money. France even states that if any of those countries, for any reason, want to access more than 20% of their own money deposited into the Central Bank of France, that they can only do this by way of a loan coming directly from France. Now, the agreement doesn't detail whether or not that loan is interest bearing, but due to the weird and due to the authoritative and due to the tyrannous government in France, it's very likely that that loan is interest bearing. The thing is, it gets worse. If any of the 14 nations tender bids to the public, for example, if they decide they would like to build a railway from A to B, French companies have right of first refusal. It must first go to the French to decide if they want that contract to build that railway, and they have the first right of refusal before it goes to any other company or nation. It's ridiculous. Now, just a few more details about this pact. These countries are obliged to make French their official language. Exclusivity to supply countries with military equipment. So if, for instance, Ivory Coast decided that, right, we want to buy military equipment for our army, they have to buy it from France, making France even more money. They are also forced to side with France in any case of conflict or war. Now, on that note, did you know that up to 1.2 million Africans died in World War II? A lot of them backing France, not as a matter of choice. What do I think of all of this? I'm appalled, I'm disgusted. I can't believe this happens this very day. And I actually agree with the Italian Deputy Prime Minister, who described France as atrocious. Modern day colonizers. You know, he described them in an interview. Just watch this clip.
There are dozens of African countries where France is printing a currency of its own, the franc of the colonies. And with that currency, French debt is financed. If France didn't have African colonies, which it's impoverishing, it would be the 15th world economic power.
Crazy, right? Now, former French President, I can't say his name properly, former French President Jacques Chirac, he couldn't have said it any clearer when he said, without Africa, France would slide down into the rank of third world nation instead of first world, which it currently is. That was France's own former president saying that about France, him realizing how much France benefits and relies on Africa for its money. On that note, his estimated 500 billion American dollars is held within France's central bank in Paris, money which comes from these 14 nations in Africa. Now, all of this, it makes my blood boil. It's sad to hear all of this, but I mean, the good news is that 15 African nations, 8 of which are of the 14 that France controls their economy, have decided that they are going to come up with their own currency, and they've named it the ECO, and they've decided to use that to replace the CFA franc. And although they've decided that they were going to do this many years ago, and it's stopping and starting, pause and starting, and it's not really coming to fruition, the plan is still there, and I think that's the good news that we can take from this message. Now, just wrapping it up, the United Nations in the 1950s came up with this charter, or this initiative for decolonisation, to make sure that every colonised nation is self-governing. But guess what? Who one of the founding charter members are of the United Nations? France. France are one of the original members of the United Nations and have veto power. Now, if you've ever heard of that word or don't know what it means to have veto power, it means that any of the founding members of the United Nations have the power to veto. So if they decide that they were going to go into a country to help it, maybe there was civil war, if France decided, no, I'm going to veto that, it means the United Nations could no longer do that. Now, France have used its veto power on several occasions, and in one instance, in discussion about whether an African nation should become independent, France used its veto power to stop a nation becoming independent. Google it if you don't believe me. Now, that's all from me, guys. My name is Marcusio. You've been watching Timeline News, and if you've enjoyed this video, hit a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and see you on the next one. Peace.